7:40 on March 22nd, 2022. I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Darien Board of Finance to order. The first item on our agenda, as always, is public comment. We have two people here in the meeting that signed up to talk. The first one, Leila Buckjune. Okay, if you guys want to come up to the microphone doesn't broadcast in the room. It just allows Channel 79 to pick it up. Okay?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Leila Buckjune, and I live at 12 Du Bois Street, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Darien High School Parents Association.
And I'm Antoinette Cowles, and I am the other co-chair of the DHSPA. On behalf of the DHSPA, we are speaking tonight in support of the Board of Education's proposed budget. We are grateful for the countless hours spent by the district administration and the Board of Ed to develop a budget that allows the Darien Public Schools to continue to offer an exceptional education to all Darien students. We believe this year's budget is financially responsible and maintains the high standards for which Darien is known. To give some context, we would like to highlight some of the items within the budget which we support this year that directly impact the students at DHS. We strongly support the addition of the grant-funded school psychologist at DHS, as there is an increased need for social emotional support. 4 psychologists provide valuable continuity, allowing each psychologist to stay with a specific grade for all 4 years. We also support the addition of the SSD coordinator. Testing accommodations and the number of students taking tests have increased significantly. Last year, 445 students took 943 AP exams, and that doesn't include other tests or any student with testing accommodations through an IEP or 504 plan. This small stipend position would allow the Director of Guidance to focus on more impactful student-related activities.
Next in the budget are additional coaches for freshman field hockey and girls rugby. Currently, freshman football, boys lacrosse, and boys soccer each have 2 assistant coaches. We believe freshman girls should have the same opportunities to participate in their sports. Additionally, we support reinstating the China Exchange Program. This important DHS program helps to increase our students' global and cultural awareness, promoting diversity through interactions with different cultures. Finally, this year there have been acts of hate and vandalism in our building. We strongly support the funding in this year's budget for work pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that our school can be a place where everyone feels safe and appreciated, where differences enrich us all. It's time we address these issues through education. In conclusion, we ask for the Board of Finance's support of the education budget as it stands, because of the many ways it directly supports our students and upholds Darien's excellence in education. Please remember, our schools are the best of the best and our town's biggest asset. We believe it is in Darien's interest to continue the long tradition of academic excellence found within our town's schools. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else wants to speak tonight? Well, Leila, Antoinette, I just remind you, our board is set to talk about and discuss the Board of Ed budget on the 29th. We've invited the chair of the Board of Ed, Dr. Adley, Rich Rudel, and a few other of his sort of C-suite to kind of come in the event that we have questions. And so you'll be able to give comment if you want at the beginning of that meeting. And then we have a meeting 2 days later on the 31st, which you can give comment before we actually vote on it on the 5th. So certainly appreciate you guys coming and appreciate your comments. Okay. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is we're going to go through 5 of the different Board of Selectmen categories. I think based on, let me just check the order right here. Let me see here. I think so. We have general government as the first item we're going to go through. I think we're going to put that at the back, but I guess, Paul, since you're here now, can we go through that?
We can go through that. Yeah.
Okay.
Paul, I've got some notes here I'll just read from.
Go ahead.
Okay. So there are 13 different departments that make up the general government bucket. I'm going to go through each of them briefly. The first department is the Board of Selectmen, where total expenditures of $285,000 are budgeted, which is a decrease of $40,000 or 12% from fiscal '22. The reason for this decrease was the completion of the emergency services study. Other accounts were effectively flat year over year. Revenues are budgeted at $760,000, approximate $80,000 decrease from fiscal '22. Principal reason for that was a $128,000 transfer in from the general fund in last year's budget, which is at zero this year. Last year's transfer in was to fund purchase of the Crimmins Road property. This was partially offset by a $7,000 increase in projected rent from Metro Mobile, which rents space for cell towers, and a $28,000 increase in projected educational cost sharing grant from the state. Before I move on, anything on that budget? Any questions?
What'd you say about the ECS grant?
Projected $28,000 increase
Okay.
in projected ECS grant. The next budget is the town administrator. Total expenditures budgeted at $390,300,000, down modestly versus last year's budget. A decline of about $8,000 in salaries was partially offset by a budgeted $3,500 increase in Channel 79 expenses, principally for software and support. Salaries were budgeted down due to reclassification of contractual 457 contributions. Revenues of about $17,000 consist principally of parking tickets and is projected relatively flat year over year. This is down from $30,000, but adjusted for reduced activity due to COVID. Moving on to human resources, expenditures budgeted flat at $217,000, pretty much all line items at or close to last year's levels. There are no revenues associated with that account. The next is finance department, with expenditures budgeted at $443,000, slightly above last year's number of $442,000, with pretty much all line items at or close to last year's levels. Revenue consisting of interest income is budgeted to decline from last year's figure of $125,000 to $71.7 in fiscal '23. This assumes a 15 basis point average rate of return on the town's cash position. We may want to discuss this account. It's hard to project interest income, but right now, earlier this week when I wrote this, 1 month treasuries were at 22, and the 1 year treasury was at 1.22, suggesting that interest rates, and we know that the Fed is going to be increasing rates over the balance of the year. That fact was taken into account with this projection, but there's certainly some upside to this number. Whether we want to budget that upside is maybe something to be discussed.
In the finance department?
That's where the revenue is booked.
The treasurer's revenue?
Yes. It's actually booked in the finance department, at least on OpenGov it is.
Yeah, that's where it's been on the ledger for
Yeah.
decades.
The treasurer is actually the next item, and expenditures are up $800,000, which is contractual raise in salary, effectively.
$800,000.
$800,000? 800, I'm
I
sorry.
wish it was up 800,000.
Sorry, Paul. Sorry about that.
Come on.
29.9 versus 29.1. $800
Got it,
increase,
got it.
sorry. That sounds, yes. The next item is Board of Finance audit. This is basically our audit expenses, up $2.9 thousand or 6.7%. And that's net of the charge back to the Board of Education for their share. The next item is the assessor, so $379,000 of budgeted expenditures, up about 1% year over year. With revenues projected at $67,000, up from $12,000 last year. We're estimating to collect an additional $55,000 on state-owned property based on a change in the way the state calculates those values. All right, there's 6 left. Tax collection expenditures projected at $290,000 versus $283,000 last year, principally due to salary increases. Revenues projected at $157 million, but this is really a function of our budget. So the revenue line in tax collection is a is what we're solving to through this process.
Yep.
But there is a number in there that basically makes the budget generate the mill rate. Legal services, contractual services budgeted 7%. It increased to $731,000 from $704,000 last year, principally to cover anticipated increased litigation expenses. $6,000 in estimated probate costs this year versus $6,700 last year. And these are our share of costs after the 50% split with New Canaan. The IT budget's projected at $425,000 this year versus about $410,000 last year. That's up $15,000 or 3.7%, driven by a projected approximate $9,000 increase in current contracted services and a $6,000 projected increase in services to the Board of Education. The Registrar of Voters is budgeting $170,000 in expenditures versus about $150,000 last year, up 20 some odd $1,000 or 14%. I think as most of the town is aware and this board is aware, we're at least with the current redistricting plans that came out of the state. We'll have to go to 10 ballot styles in the forthcoming election versus 7 in last year's. And that results in additional ballots that have to be printed. We also don't print as many of the same ballots, so we lose some volume discount. So there's a kind of an accordion effect of that. I know the RTM is proposing to modify, so maybe this number can improve. But as far as I know tonight, we should budget against the 10 ballot styles. And finally, the town clerk, $325,000 budgeted in fiscal '23 versus $318.7 in '22, up $6.7 or just 2%, with revenues projected flat at about $1.6 million. These consist principally of licenses and permits. That's it on the operating side. Paul, did you want to add?
Well, you covered most of it. I just want to point out the Registrar of Voters and the elections, the large increase is due primarily to outside forces. So we really don't have much control over that. And then the legal expense increasing $27,000. That's really to put the budget consistent with what the actuals have been in previous years. And Jennifer, could you explain the tax collection allocation? Or
So what's online as the Board of Selectmen budget, I think this caused some confusion.
Yeah, I sat there and
what we
tax
have-
collection is down 101,000, a million.
Right, when we put together the Board of Selectmen budget, the tax collection number is only what's needed to support the Board of Selectmen side of it.
Right.
Okay.
So it does look a little strange if you pull up some of the PDFs online with the Board of Selectmen, because it doesn't include the Board of Ed. What you have in OpenGov is now a complete Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed. So that's where
Okay.
Dan's $157 million came from, because that's what's needed to support the two proposals.
Right.
Which basically become the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
And it's not a
Budget.
budgeted revenue number. It's a
Nope.
plug to make the budget work based on the proposed budgets from each of the
Right.
Right.
boards,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Right.
So,
But once we set that, it becomes a budgeted number, and that's what
course.
we sort of track over the year and so forth, right?
Exactly.
So,
there's a couple of capital items before we move on from
Yep.
general government. Go ahead.
So I just had one question, partially relates to capital. On the assessment, or aren't we also, have we been continuing to reserve a certain amount
Yes.
each of 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, that's part of the
prior?
capital. So,
Yep.
yeah, so there's 3 items on capital. There's a $92,000 for revaluation reserve. There's $39,000 to fund desktop computer upgrades. All other items were funded under ARPA. So yes, those 2 items are still in the budget. So the revaluation reserve, yes, is at 92, and another 39 to fund desktop computer
Got
upgrades.
it. But the actual work of the revaluation won't pop up until fiscal year '24, because it really occurs in, is it October '23?
Well, it's for the October 1, 2024 grand list, which means that they will be doing work before then.
Got
They
it.
have to be able to enter into a contract and begin doing all the work so that they have all the information ready on time.
Yeah, because I just noticed that the assessor's budget was up, you know, under $4,000.
3.6%.
So there's no-
9% year over year.
Yeah, so in this budget, there's really not a lot of additional work.
They don't, in their operating budget, they don't really incur much additional expense due to reval. They may have additional workload, but they handle it with their existing staff on the operating side, and then they contract out for the other part of it, and that runs through capital non-recurring.
Got it.
So I didn't aggregate all of that into one number for general government, but you could get the sense that most of these budgets are pretty flat year over year. And where they're up or down, we went through the rationale.
I think as a total, it's up 1.2%.
Yeah, there you go.
Why did you say the administrator's budget was down? I forget, because you said it, but I didn't understand.
403B allocation, wasn't it?
There was $8,000 in salary, decline of about $8,000 in salaries, partially offset by $3,500 increase in Channel 79 expenses. And salaries were budgeted down to a reclassification for contractual 457 contributions. So there was just a reclass of that contribution out of the salary line, which meant salaries went down.
Right, it's over in benefits now.
Yeah, which,
Dan, on the interest income component, did you say that it was budgeted on 15 basis points return?
yes, she ran 3 scenarios at 5 and 10 and 15, notwithstanding that there's some financial institutions not providing much, if anything.
Yeah.
Her characterization, the large banks are flush with deposits. They're really not searching for deposits, and it costs them a little bit more to carry our deposits as a municipal entity. The smaller banks are modestly more interested in our deposits, and therefore willing to pay a little bit more for it. But I think my observation was that the budget was set at kind of where we are today, with an expectation, a modest expectation of rates going up. And I think, and I think it's an open question as to whether we want to budget a higher number. I think we can certainly talk about that. I think we should also be careful about that because the world can change.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Do we know what the current year-to-date realized return is?
I don't have that.
I don't have it handy, but I can ask Joan for that.
Yeah, I was just thinking in terms of, where is 15 relative to what we are earning now? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's up from, and basically, I think most of last year was effectively close to 0 basis point environment for short-term deposits.
I think
Close to
I
0.
think that's true for the marginal invested dollar, but Joan has done a good job at investing some of the monies a little bit longer term, so
Yeah.
without sort of, digging into that a little more granularly, it's a little
Yeah.
hard to. So we haven't in practice invested in treasuries. Heretofore, we've only been investing in deposits, and this may not be the right framework to have that conversation, but at some point, treasuries are pretty safe too, and there's a whole yield curve on the short side, so we could sort of match our liability stream fairly easily.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. And I do know that Joan is having discussions and sort of looking at, particularly in this environment,
yeah.
about expanding it to include sort of T-bills and other short-term things. So it's part rates going up is good, but the problem is that the sort of.
Can we actually achieve them?
Yes,
Right,
because a
yeah.
lot of banks, if you deposit $100 from a municipality, they require you to hold 100 plus, as opposed to if we deposit money, it's a fraction of that.
Right.
So that has made it sort of reserve negative.
Right.
But she's also been precluded by our council, because if she invests in treasuries, it's not governed by Connecticut law. It's SIPC law, which is in New York State, and Wayne was adverse to having New York State be the guidance. So
Yeah.
they're gonna hash it out with the Board of Selectmen.
Yeah, there's a meeting scheduled with council on April 5th to discuss being able to do T-bills.
And speaking of the world changing and the use of small banks for deposits, is all this money insured against a bank failing?
We have FDIC $250,000, and Joan does try to be very cautious with the smaller banks She does like to place funds locally if she can, and if she feels that the bank is secure. She likes to spread around our money, but always keeping in mind the FDIC limit unless she's very comfortable with the bank. And then we have our larger operating dollars at People's because that's very secure.
But if you think about it, we have tens of millions of dollars to invest, and if you divide it by $250,000, then you're going to be in a lot of banks.
Busy. Yeah.
Which is, but that creates its own issue when you're trying to track, et cetera. And plus, there's also benefits to consolidating your deposit activity. You can get preferential rates as well
So,
on the margin.
Can I just check my understanding of something? The New York law and SIPC governing, that only applies if we're buying treasuries through a New York-based bank, right? If we buy treasuries through Treasury Direct, we're buying from the U.S. government directly, and there wouldn't be any New York law-based application because New York law would be superseded by federal law.
Well, talk to Wayne.
You're still buying them through a broker
Sounds
dealer.
right.
Yeah, maybe a clearing.
Unless you're a direct participant in, I think, in the direct buy program.
Treasury.
But I know it's something that they're focused on.
So Jen, is that the Board of Selectmen meeting on the 5th?
No, it's a meeting with the first selectman, the treasurer, myself, and our council.
But that's to determine
Okay.
whether or not we can buy treasuries, right? Like, are we gonna revisit this in revenues, Jim? Or
Well, I think, listen,
Question of whether we can. It's a
the
question
investment
of
policy
legal.
falls underneath the treasurer, right? I think
What's that?
the investment policy falls underneath the treasurer.
Oh,
so-
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about whether or not we're comfortable with the revenue amount that's in the budget. You know, assuming 15 basis points, are we deciding that tonight, or are we gonna revisit that when we get to revenues, I think, on the 31st, or whatever day it is?
So we'll look at it as part of revenues and so forth, and ultimately, when we set the budget on what's currently scheduled to be April 5th, we can sort of adjust anything, but I do think, we need to kind of think long and hard if we're going to sort of deviate from what staff is, is recommending, whether it's on the investment side, or on the tax collection side, or on the, on the town clerk revenue, but it's something. I think from a budgeting standpoint, listen, it's revenue that comes in. It's all captured in the general fund, and I know she's searching for other ways to sort of, like T-bills, squeak out extra basis points, because on 26 million of fund balance and I guess 30 million of bond proceeds we're sitting on right now, and our normal sort of day-to-day operating capital, it's a big number, so basis points matter. So I know that's why she's looking at it.
Jen,
That's it on-
would it be appropriate or inappropriate for me to ask to attend that meeting on the 5th?
It is not my meeting to invite or disinvite somebody, but I can pass along to those who are scheduling the meeting that you would be
Yeah,
interested.
I don't want to step on any toes. Honestly, I'm just sort of geeking out as a former bond investor about the details and the issues. Right? I mean, that's kind of what I see.
I spoke to Joan, so we can catch up afterwards.
All right, yes,
Okay.
cool.
So
Um,
go
Can I
ahead.
just jump in here? Kind of to Taylor's question of, are we throwing out ideas of, or proposals of changes? As we go through, if there are proposals that people would like to make, I would ask that you voice them so that we can start creating a list of the issues or the questions, the proposals that you have, see what the impact would be on the budget through our master budget file. Just because somebody throws something out right now doesn't mean it is blessed and is going to be a change, but we can just start compiling that list and we'll circle back to it, and then you as a board will say yes or no to each of those proposals.
Yeah, and I'm not, just so people don't misconstrue my comments, I'm not suggesting that we change this number, but to me, it was kind of the one item in the whole general government category that maybe had parentheses around it, as people think about it. So we may or may not choose to readdress it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we can add that to the list. I mean, with the rate environment the way it is, it should be discussed, I think, a little bit.
Okay.
And where does the Board of Finance contingency account fall?
That's in general overhead.
That's in what?
General overhead.
Okay.
That's it for general government.
Okay, so next item up is community and environment, which I think is we have Taylor and,
Well, it's John and
sorry, John and, it's John and Dan. It was reset to
By
John and-
default.
By default, yeah.
Further, it's John.
Yes.
Community environment, also known as Community Services, comprises 3 proposed budgets: beautification, celebrations and community grants, also known as community observances, and harbor master, which together total $146,001, a proposed $43,000, or just under a 42% increase from last year. That overall increase could be distilled into 2 components: $30,000 for holiday lights and $13,000 for groundskeeping around Town Hall and the Squab Lane berm. The harbor master budget remains unchanged at $3,100. Questions asked included whether the old lights can be patched together for yet another year, and why the increases in groundskeeping. Response to the latter is that previous budgets have barely covered daily maintenance around the town hall, and the grounds need work to remove invasive plant and animal species, including the particularly destructive spotted lanternfly, now invading Connecticut. There is also a capital component of $5,000 specifically to address species problems at the berm. The response to the former was that although new lights may have in the past been considered nice to have, they do require periodic replacement and will enhance the town's holiday season. In discussions, Dan and I and Jenny Swartz have concluded that even the need for nice to have should at least be considered and will inevitably sooner or later bubble to the surface.
So I think that the written description of the Chamber of Commerce request for this increase in the grant for these garlands to wrap around the light poles rather than the wreaths where A, they're less denominational, and B, the older ones are in disrepair. So we both got comfortable with supporting that item.
I thought they had paid for that with private funds.
I think there's a different item, I think, maybe related, or maybe they're paying for partial of it with private funds, but
Aren't the plants, I think are the plants the ones that are privately
might be
funded?
the plants that are privately funded.
No,
This
no.
is
No, those are through beautification,
okay.
the hanging baskets.
Okay.
Right.
And there's no capital in this account.
How much do we spend on holiday lights?
This would be, what, 30, from 5 to 35
Right.
is the proposal.
30,000 increase.
Yeah, and this is not an annual, right? This should last us a while.
Right.
So I don't know what the last time it was bumped, but it was only bumped to 5 whenever it was done. So.
Did we talk about cemeteries at all? I remember last year,
On the capital side.
have we not gotten there yet?
Well, cemeteries is in this budget, but it's up $5,000. Remember last year it was zeroed out, I think, or it was zero.
In the last couple
Because
of
it's
years,
been
it was put
done
in capital.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And the nature of the work isn't
Okay.
really major cleanup anymore. It's more routine mowing, trimming, that sort of thing. So we're moving the funds out of capital and into
It's
operating.
$5,000, and a lot of that work had been done by volunteers, right?
Right.
Yes.
Privately.
So is the town assuming the cost of maintenance, or, I mean, I can't imagine $5,000 is enough to cover that. Do we know what's happening?
I think that was their request. I don't think Kate cut that.
I think that was the request. Yeah.
Did they put another one through capital or no?
No,
No.
nothing in capital because the major work is done and this is just kind of upkeep now.
Yeah, the other items in this budget are flat to last year. Depot, Kids in Crisis, and Historical Society grants. Those are flat year over year. Proposed as to funded last year.
I mean, these are probably among the smallest budgets, and they're all relatively consistent. I do think each year, sometimes small things pop up, whether it's the cemeteries. I want to say 2 years ago, when they had a bunch of capital and sort of the garland and so forth this year, but it's, in aggregate, the budgets don't really move around a lot for this. Any other questions on the community environment? Okay. land use.
Yeah, so land use, so Rob Cardona's part on this, and he had to be, he's out of town for work. The building department is the first department in this budget category. Proposed budget of about $541,000, which is down $33,000 from last year, principally because we had a former chief building officer who was acting as a part-time building inspector, and so we had to pay for that activity. He retired, and that building inspector position was filled at a lower step. So that basically reduced the salaries needed for this function by $30,000. Permanent revenue is budgeted at $1.3 million, down from $1.6 million. As construction activity begins its return to more normalized levels, the town looked back at 2018 to 2020 to kind of get a normalized level of permit revenue. True that up a little bit for some of the activity that's still ongoing. For example, the Palmer property, there's still a number in there for that, and some other activity, but it's basically more of a normalized permit revenue budget. That's it on the building department. On planning and zoning, there's a proposed budget of $810,000, up $3,000 from last year, which is effectively flat. There's a $9,000 reduction in salaries as an assistant director retired, and he was replaced at a lower step. There's $12,000 reduction in software and support. There's a $20,000 increase in consulting services as that retired assistant director will be retained by the town as a consultant to develop an affordable housing plan. So that nets to basically flat year over year on the expenditure side. Revenues budgeted at $166,000, up $17,000 from last year, reflecting the ongoing level of development activity. And the P&Z revenue and the building permit revenue kind of come at different times of activity.
Permits on the front end and then.
Yeah, that's it on land use.
Dan, in terms of on building control, you're looking at this from a couple of years ago, it was up, I think, as I recall, Jen, didn't we have to hire another, in connection with some of the other larger buildings, we had
Yes.
needed to hire an extra inspector, one who had a little bit more knowledge with?
Yeah, well, we tried doing it with a couple of part-times,
Yeah.
and they weren't able to fill those positions, or if they filled it, they couldn't retain the person because other full-time positions would open up. So we converted those two part-times to a full-time.
Yeah, so the number of FTEs.
To get us through.
Yeah, the number of FTEs is actually down a little bit over the last couple of years, but flat year over year.
Right.
Because of what Jen just said.
Yeah. So I think it's something important to kind of keep in mind with this development activity. You see some of the positives of the additional revenue coming in the beginning, and then you see us having to kind of staff up for either additional personnel or more specialized personnel on the building permit side. And then as you see permit revenue start to come down, then you start to see I think it's the fire marshal budget where we're now going to have an extra, I think the number is 466 different units that need to be inspected, so then the costs come up there. At the same time, when these projects come on, the grand list expands. So I think when you're looking at some of these departments, you know, it's a little bit of
It's kind of a-
revenue, then expense, then more revenue, then more expense.
A little give and take because the apartments require inspection every year,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is where you get the extra units from.
Yep. We're kind of coming on the other side of the elephant going through the snake.
Yeah, but we are seeing one of the largest ever. We are seeing one of the largest ever, you know, sort of year-over-year increases we've seen in.
Sorry. Go ahead.
That's good. We are seeing one of the biggest year-over-year increases in the grand list outside of a revaluation, just with some of these larger properties beginning to come online.
Do we have that data handy?
How much is due
What was the
to
increase?
these
No.
projects?
What was the increase in?
In the grand list. Did we go over that?
Not
It's
yet,
in-
no.
No, we don't have, it's in your spreadsheet, but we don't have it at our fingertips.
Right. And normally we go over that as we're setting the mill rate.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's it on the building departments.
Yep.
General overhead and miscellaneous.
All right, general overhead and miscellaneous, John Walcott and I worked on this with Bert and Jenny Schwartz of Finance and Budget Committee and the RTM. Top line, this budget line item is up about 5.76%. The biggest component of this $8.5 million budget is employee benefits, and the biggest component of that is medical benefits, as you can imagine, medical and pension. Just like on the school side, medical insurance is up anywhere between 8 and 15%. I think they said they came down to 8, but I don't know that that was on all subsets, so like all bargaining groups. Pension, which is actuarially determined because of our performance, is flat to down in different areas this coming year. So net, we're not up that much, despite medical still being, the cause of, the greatest growth, I think, in budgets across the town. Contingency is obviously also a part of this budget, which is, has two parts to it. There's the employee salary set aside for contracts that will be settled in the coming year. That was up quite a bit year over year, and the contingency for the Board of Finance account, which was at $250,000 last year, we're requesting $300,000 the coming year. One thing I learned during this budget season, which I didn't know before, was that the town does not negotiate its medical benefits with the schools. And I have to wonder if that's something we could consider or talk about. I don't know how realistic that is. I'm not even sure, Jen, you might be able to tell me if even all of the town is negotiating together, or if it's like, I saw a reference to different bargaining groups getting different rates.
Because the bargaining, on the town side, the bargaining groups have different employee cost shares, but the whole plan
Is negotiated
all
together.
of the town
Okay.
employees.
And I was told that had to do with experience and different rates of experience or expected experience between, like the difference being between teachers and town employees. But I have to wonder if that's like old news. I have to wonder if we look at our experience, if there might be an opportunity, if we could do
Yeah.
that. But it's a big deal to change it.
Hey, Jen, do you have history on this? I thought like a number of years ago, they looked at whether or not it could be beneficial to have sort of one pool, and I thought it was determined that the demographics of the various pools suggested it would be better to negotiate them separately.
There was the Consolidated Services group, and they kind of petered out as I was getting here, so I don't know what work they did on it. But in the time that I've been here, I don't think we've looked at being able to negotiate our plan and Board of Ed plan with a provider. There is a concern, that would be a concern about the different ratings, but also their plan, the plans can be impacted by union negotiations. So that could be another obstacle. But I'll talk to Kate and see when the last time that was discussed and what the findings were.
Taylor, didn't we have a discussion as well about the fact that the library employees are in their own pool, and wondering whether, although they seem to have a better situation than the town does, at least considering whether they could be added in?
I think they were, and then they went off on their own,
Well,
if
the
I
other
recall.
big conversation we had was about, the possibilities of self-insurance. Like I said, that's above my pay grade to know whether or not we can convene some kind of committee to look at the best way to do this across the town, but.
Well, I've sent an email to the chairman of the Board of Ed and to our first selectman, asking them to set up a group, including people on both of their staffs, to look at our healthcare experience, consider everything from whether or not some type of partial self-insurance and or other things could be achieved, that we need to sort of completely open this up.
Thank you.
And kind of leave no stone unturned in trying to figure out a way to
Exactly.
to do that. As I mentioned, I think in some of my remarks at a prior meeting, when you look at sort of what $100 million of grand list adds to our budget, sorry, to our taxable revenues, which is about $1.2 million, that amount is more than overtaken by just the increase. If you look at the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen, those two healthcare benefit increases aside, just to kind of frame it,
Yeah.
given the size of some of these investments, it's great, it builds a grand list, but this is growing so quickly. So they've both acknowledged it and kind of said as soon as we get through the budget season, they will
Great.
sort of pull staff together and look at this.
And we may
They
decide,
get dental as well, do they not? And dental typically is a much less advantageous deal for the employees because you end up paying almost as much, if not more, in terms of the service that the employee gets and premiums and all. And the question is can part of that be self-insured? to
On the
everybody?
town side, we are self-insured for dental.
Oh, okay.
Fully self-insured or just for a portion of the deductible?
No, fully.
Fully?
Yep.
I'm just glad we're gonna look at it, because it seems like, we kind of poke at this every year, but we don't.
You don't have a $100,000 loss in dental, though, like you could for a cancer.
Right.
But we hope not.
So on the Board of Finance contingency, I mean, that's how, when you look at the, just to note, we're moving up the Board of Finance contingency from 250,000 to 300,000,
Yeah.
which is 50,000 higher than last time, but it's 100,000 less than, the 400,000, I think, Jen, that we had for probably 5 or 6 years running.
I still think that's something we should talk about. I actually got some numbers from Jen way back in time, and I apologize, I don't have those to hand, but I remember calculating the average utilization out of the account, and it was dramatically below the $250,000 level. I want to say it was closer, it was under 150,000 on average utilization. So keep maintaining it at $250,000 might find us a little bit of conservation. But let me pull up that spreadsheet tomorrow. I'll send it to you guys.
Yeah, we looked at this analysis 2 years ago when we first dropped it from 400 to 300. The only thing I would just remind people is that the Board of Finance contingency can support either the town side or the school side in terms of on the operating budget. And I guess, Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Board of Finance contingency can be used for both operating and capital if needed?
Right, because you can transfer from contingency to our transfer out to capital and
Yeah.
fund capital that way by increasing the contribution from the general fund.
Yeah. So I think, the one thing I would just say is that we think about this number, we should think about it in the context of town and school budgets and in connection with what we've done over the last couple of years as it relates to consolidating or collapsing a lot of the small capital reserves that we had sort of all over and consolidating them all into effectively the Board of Finance capital contingency.
Okay. I'll have to think through that because I was looking specifically at the contingency account, not the capital side, because there is a separate Board of Finance capital contingency account too. Right?
Yeah.
So, but I guess what I've been thinking is that looking at the average utilization would have captured any Board of Finance or, town side or Board of Ed utilization over prior years. And it would be indicative of, kind of historic utilization. But I need to double check on one thing because there was 1 year in which I think that the use of that account was over $250,000. So that bears in mind too of, maybe the appropriate level for setting it is to cover what we think a potential high number might be, not an average number, because on average you wouldn't really expect to tap contingency that much if you've budgeted effectively and unexpected things don't pop up, right? But I'll send. I've got the last 5 years. I'll send it around tomorrow. I just thought it was worth having a conversation about, and then we can discuss it and come to the right decision.
Yeah. How much have we used of our existing? I think the biggest use I thought was of the.
The 102 for HHR. Oh, that came from capital.
Yeah,
Sorry.
but it was part of I think the civilian dispatch.
Right, that was 60,000-ish, and then we just moved another significant amount for legal, that 50,000. I think we've used probably about 150-ish. Let me get the exact number. I'll send it out tomorrow.
Okay.
Do we want to move on?
And then I guess just one question. Which employee groups are does the 400,000 support?
So a big chunk of that is budget 2 years of increases for the town hall union, which just settled. This payroll, they're getting their increase. Next payroll, they'll be getting their retro. So I can project that, and we can get that cleared out and moved into the departments before your vote. They have had some retirements and some movement in their positions, so I don't think we're going to have to use everything that we set aside in there, and we can release some of that. The other union in there is the police department, because their contract expires June 30th of this year. We have not yet begun negotiations, so an assumed increase is in the employee salary set aside for them. And then we always budget estimated increases for the non-union positions in that same account.
And when will those be set?
Those will be set by the Board of Selectmen in June,
Okay.
and then the police will be whenever we settle the contract.
Okay. So I guess just in terms of change, and this may not be an absolute change in the number, but some of it will move out of this and move into the town hall staff.
Right.
Okay. Next item is human services, I think, which is also Taylor and John, right?
Yeah. So yeah, John Walcott and Louisa Brackman of Finance and Budget spoke with me about this. And this budget's only about 1.4 million. It's up less than 3%. This one's always something, everyone enjoys patting them on the back where they've done a great job. I think the salary raise, or I guess it's salary raise that is really contributing to any increase in, the regular human services expenses kind of line item. It does, this budget comprises, it has the expenses line item, and then it has a direct assistance account. There's the health department, the senior center, senior transportation, and youth services. Direct assistance, the budget is tiny, it's $18,000, but they do raise most of that money privately, and of course now there is money set aside in the ARPA grant for things that they tend to do with that money, rental assistance and food insecurity and that sort of thing. Let's see, Health Department has revenues associated with it as well. I guess the only question I still have is, and I didn't realize it until it was too late to ask, it doesn't look like we're budgeting any increase in permitting for new developments, which, I don't know if that's a lot of money or not, but.
There's a slight increase, I think, in the restaurant, food establishment inspections with anticipation of new establishments opening.
But it's really,
But the health department wouldn't have much to do until things are up and running and open. In terms of the redevelopment projects, they wouldn't have much impact.
I think the number was 43 was the total new food and beverage.
For all of the
For all
developments,
three ones,
right.
but of which the early ones will only come online towards the back of this.
Right.
So it's something like the fire marshal that I think will.
Okay.
Right, at some point, we'll need to add probably a health inspector to address the need, but the department did request that, and based on the timing, the town administrator removed it.
That's right, yeah.
With a kind of a commitment of if these projects move along and
They
we
go.
need it, we'll figure it out and
Okay.
get what we need.
Senior center up less than 4%. I guess the cost of food has gone up. Nothing big to talk about there as far as I'm concerned. And youth services, that is, most of the money that flows through that account is covered. It's the summer camp program, so the program expenses are covered by revenues. We're really just covering the overhead or the personnel in that department, which is minimal. So, this budget in general is solid as far as I am concerned. And sorry, John, I didn't ask you to opine.
Nope, nothing to add.
I think on the senior center, you know, there's no material change there, but I would say as part of the ARPA grant, there was some money in there to fund, you know, at least one new program, the sort of iPad.
iPad, yeah, it's basically an AV. It was $10,000.
Yeah. And on the health side, there's a significant amount in there for any future vaccine clinics and/or PPE and all the other protective equipment.
And so if we don't have any future vaccine clinics, what happens?
Well, I think the use needs to be identified by the end of 2024, right, Jen?
Right.
And so I guess if there were 0 clinics as we approach the end of 2024, they would need to begin to think about reallocating it to something else that we could definitely use by the end of 2026.
Yeah, right. And I think it was 50,000 that was appropriated from ARPA, but they do have expenses that they incurred with the school-age clinics, the booster clinics, that we're going to be able to reclass out of the general fund and over to ARPA.
Oh.
So that 50,000 is for clinics that we've already had as well as future
So
clinics.
that's got a reimbursement component to it,
Right.
where none of the other ARPA items
Right.
have that. Right.
So is it just that 150, just that 50?
Yes.
So that'll come back, like, is cash coming back into the general fund this year?
It's expense that we're going to move out of the general fund. So they had to charge it somewhere because we didn't have the ARPA allocation yet. So some seasonal temporary help, some supplies, that sort of thing is charged right now to the public health budget in the general fund. But we're going to reclass those out. So rather than them going over budget in those accounts, they'll be within budget.
Okay.
Got it. So this was an excess that they already had.
Right.
So this isn't going to add to a surplus.
No. It's going to prevent a deficit.
Oh, the only other thing, Jen, I know you wrote back that we do insure the drivers of the at-home and Darien program.
Right.
Do we know how much that is?
I don't know because all of our vehicles are rated together, just as part of our auto. Theirs are very minimal compared to the rest of the
Yeah.
vehicle and fleet that we insure.
And is that the one piece we don't get reimbursed?
We don't get reimbursed
No.
for a couple of things. We get reimbursed for the direct pay for the drivers, as well as they cover fuel costs, the minimal maintenance on the vehicles. But the town covers FICA and Medicare. We insure them on our workers' comp, and we cover the property insurance on the vehicles.
Okay. And the vehicles themselves are donated, I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on human services or any of these 5 topics?
Nope. Nope.
Okay. Any other questions on any of the other items that we're planning to discuss next week? I sent an email around of trying to accumulate any and all questions that we may have for the Board of Ed. They're going to be first on our agenda on the 29th.
I need to go back and look. The Board of Ed provided some answers
Yeah.
early in the process, and I have not reconciled my initial spreadsheet with questions to those answers yet. So let me clean that up before I see if there's anything left over.
Okay. There's an email I sent around a month and a half ago that included all of the questions that
Oh, okay, I'll look for
all
that.
the different
Right,
constituents, the
right.
Board of Ed.
Yeah.
The Board of Ed had like 4 or 5 of their own packets. You know, we had a packet, RTM and so forth, so maybe as, you know, one homework assignment for everybody, I think kind of reading through a lot of those questions and answers
Sure, absolutely.
will
Yeah.
be a good refresher.
And you saw I sent out an email to our F&B buddies for fire. I didn't hear anything back from them. I just wanted to circle with you to find out, do you want me to cover it next week, or did you want to?
We can do it together.
Okay.
But I have, we'll set up, but maybe, let's have a talk later this week about a
Yeah,
couple
sure.
of those
All right, sure.
things.
Do you want to, why don't you go through the schedule for next week so people are reminded, because it's moved a little bit, the department, right?
Yeah, so.
Which departments we're reviewing has moved around a little bit, so,
Yeah,
especially for the public.
Yeah, and Jen, maybe I sent around, I think yesterday, or last night, this sheet right here. Maybe it'd be helpful if we just pop that up to, on the website,
Yeah, we can do that.
just to show everybody when we're reviewing everything. But on next Tuesday, March 29th, the plan is that we'll be looking at 3 different budget areas. The first is the Board of Ed, both operating and capital
Right.
side of their budget. Public Works, and then Parks and Rec. And Parks and Rec, I have, Walcott and Baumgartner, and Public Works is Cardone and Dave Martin on those. And Parks and Rec, I know, on that one, there's obviously the budget that we're gonna be looking at, but also sort of the change in methodology.
Yeah. Which kind of obfuscates it a little bit.
Yeah, and I think, I know Jen had actually worked with us in terms of the memo they put together for the Board of Selectmen and sort of being able to compare an apples-to-apple basis inside of this budget,
Sure.
because things that were
Yeah.
revenues and expenses are now really sort of, I guess, one net contribution.
Yes, that would be accurate.
We have to examine that new fund and the
Right.
pluses and minuses
Yeah.
of that new fund, which is the same way you would look at it as if it was part of the general fund.
This will just allow them to basically, if increased
Or Parks and Rec.
revenues come in for more programming, they can use those same dollars, right, Jen, to provide for the expenses, as opposed to the last couple of years, they needed to kind of come by us
And have another transfer.
and get an approval and a transfer. to
Right,
just
go all
keep-
the way through the RTM.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the 3 on the 31st, you want to?
Yeah, so then on the 31st, which will be, next Thursday, we're going to go through police, we're going to go through fire and emergency services, which include, the emergency management, the library, and we're going to go through debt service, as well as all other sort of revenues, and that includes sort of the discussion around fund balance. So just for the public, we'll have a spreadsheet here that'll be uploaded to the website, tomorrow, that'll show you sort of, what's on the agenda for our remaining meetings.
And we vote on the 5th of April. Right?
Yep, that is our intention. I think by statute, we're required to do it by the 3rd Tuesday in April, but we're gonna do it the first Tuesday, because the second Tuesday is spring break, and then, that would sort of leave us a very short time.
Yeah, we have to file it with the town clerk on the 3rd Tuesday, so you would have to vote
On
by
the
the
following
3rd Monday.
Monday. So, I would just remind the public, we have public comment at the beginning of every one of our meetings, so if anybody wants to speak at any of our next meetings, I encourage you to do so. And if you're not able to attend, please send us an email at bof@darien-ct.gov, and we'll make sure it gets to everyone on our board and attach it to our minutes for that meeting so that the public can also read all of those. With that, any other business? Motion to adjourn? John? David second, all in favor? So adjourned.